right.
All right, it's time to get started. And Eric, that mic right there.
Eric, you might as well take this because we didn't have
Problem
it
is
there.
Eric never remembers he has one.
Yeah. Well, he don't really have to use one as light as he is.
I got the queen here next to me today. She'll remind me, the pink shark.
All right, it's time for us to get started after that comment. Good to see everybody. We're going to be in Genesis 18 and 19, and we're going to be talking about Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yep.
I asked Scott if we thought we could get through this without getting too distracted by homosexuality, and he said we'd see. But we're going to try to do that because we've kind of used this in some ways as another proof text.
Yeah.
And I think the important thing we try to remember this whole study is that what we've done to this book a lot of time is not what Moses intended it for it to be.
Yeah. Right.
Right?
Sure.
And so we've kind of ruined its value in the process. So hopefully, not ruined, but we've misconstrued it. We've abused it. And so we want to try to see it from, I say fresh eyes, but it's probably the old eyes. We've probably got
Fresh for us, yeah.
Yeah, fresh for us, though. Let's start off with a prayer, though, and I'm going to ask Joe if he'll lead us in that prayer. He's got a mic, and then we'll get into the study itself.
Gracious Father, we're just so thankful for this day, and we're so thankful for being able to be called your children. Walk with us in this study today and help us to open our eyes so that we might see your truth, and that your truth would transform us, and that we would be able and willing to shine the glory of your Son in this world. Walk with us as we talk to others. Help us to speak in such a way that you might be glorified and lifted up, and they may be drawn to you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
All right, so before we get into Sodom and Gomorrah, there's this little story tucked in here at the beginning of chapter 18 that's pretty important.
Yep.
There's a couple things that happen here that are important, but I think what's really interesting is this visit that happens here. What happens in this story? What are some things that happen here? Anybody can answer, by the way. What do you have? Everybody's asleep this morning, obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A meal.
It turns into a
The
meal.
old meal guy over
Yeah,
here.
yeah, Mr.
Mr. Millman.
Meals with a Messiah over here. So it doesn't start off necessarily as a meal, right? Though it turns into a meal.
Yeah.
And this is what passage kind of comes into this. What passage from later on might you attribute to this story? Anybody think about that, about hospitality? That by some have entertained angels unaware. This is one of those connections. This is probably the most direct connection to this. Is we're not really told they're angels at the beginning, are we? We're told that they are three men.
Yeah.
And what is Abraham's response to these three strangers coming? Joe?
Hospitality.
Yeah, hospitality.
Yep.
And to make them a meal, and he begs them to stay and for him to provide this.
Sure.
So what's interesting about that is when he does that, they then give this, I guess what we could call prophecy, a prediction or a promise.
Yeah.
Which is what? What happens there? What's the promise he makes, or the angels make for God?
Go ahead.
Sarah does have a son
Sarah's going to have a son when?
in 1 year.
In 1 year.
Yeah.
Why is that a big deal? There's a couple reasons maybe.
Real old.
She's real old. Okay,
Yep.
what else makes it a big deal?
She's barren.
Too barren.
She's barren. And this is the promise, by the way. Let's not forget that. This
That's
is
right.
the promise. And they've already tried to manipulate the promise somewhat,
Yes.
right? Through the story of Hagar and Ishmael. So, why does Sarah laugh?
She's old.
Ashley's going, because she's old. She's old and she's barren. Is it understandable that she laughs?
I think.
Well, I don't know that they have been for a while since they're a little
old.
bit old.
That's true. But none. Yeah.
Brandon always shows up. Yeah.
Thank you, Brandon.
You know, how old is Sarah right now? Anybody know? 88. She's 89. Because she's going to have Isaac at 90. How many... Listen, if a 90-year-old woman gave birth to a child, I think that's a lead story.
Yeah, definitely. All over the world.
That might be able to circumvent things like who got shot last night. That's
It's a big deal.
that ain't normal.
No.
That ain't
crazy.
normal, right? And so we may give her a hard time. Now, remember, we've already noticed earlier that Abraham has already laughed. But we don't really remember that. We remember this story. And we give Sarah a hard time, but I guarantee you, if you're 90 years old and told you're going to have a kid, you may not laugh, but you're going to think that's a foolish promise.
True.
Right? And from the beginning, what have they said about this promise? I'm too old and I'm barren.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, we'll get to the fulfillment of that later.
Right.
But I think it's understandable why all this happens here.
Sure.
Yeah. Right? Any thoughts, comments? That's not really a huge part. It's almost like a little speed bump to get into the real meat of today. Okay, well, let's talk about Sodom. And it's Sodom and Gomorrah, but I think one of the interesting things is Sodom really takes the focal point of this. Gomorrah seems to be the follower to the leader Sodom in a lot of ways in the story here. So before we get into what happens, let's remind ourselves, why did Lot choose Sodom?
It's fertile.
It was fertile ground and big and stood out to me, it looked like
Okay,
He looked at it. It was beautiful.
yeah.
Green in a valley.
And they
Jordan
have
Valley.
livestock, and you know about that, right? So when you
Sure.
when you choose a pasture, what are you looking for?
Oh, I'm looking for really good grass. I mean, I'm looking
Okay.
for water. You're looking for, the grass that's up and got plenty of grazing, right?
Right. Yeah. And that's what this land looks like. And when it says it looks like Edom, where did the Israelites, Egypt, where did they live in Egypt because of these same reasons? Do you remember? Goshen.
Goshen. Yeah.
They were given the land of Goshen, and kind of what happens there is Jacob kind of manipulates Pharaoh a little bit to say, hey, if you put them over here in Goshen, they'll be out of the way. You won't have to really deal with them. But also Goshen was it was the best land.
Yeah. Unreal that Jacob manipulated something, right?
Yeah, so out of his character. And Lori already said this, but Sodom is described as being like Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
And here's where we start to get
Yep.
what the lesson needs to be focused on today is, again, we go back to Sodom and we look at the sinfulness of Sodom, and so much so that I think we miss part of the sinfulness of Sodom. We'll notice that today from Ezekiel. Because we only focus on one thing, and there's more than one thing that's wrong with this area. Now, I mean, it's kind of understandable that we get this one thing, because after all, it is it's even affected our language when you think about it. Sodomy is a term that originates from this story.
Yeah.
So it's had a cultural worldwide impact in that sense, which is important. But it's described like Egypt. It's described as a good land.
Sure.
And you remember when Lot chooses it, Abraham's even told, don't worry, I'll take care of you.
Mm-hmm.
That must be how different the two lands were.
Yeah, I mean, I've thought that same thing. God tells Abraham, well, Lot took that, so I don't worry about it. I'm going to take care of it. And man, it must have been like, wow, man, that's that's a big difference, right?
And it's interesting that when you think about the stories that are to come, we'll see this more often, how God provides for his people in unusual circumstances. For instance, Jacob is going to really benefit and profit. You're going to see that when they start talking about, I get the livestock that looks this way
This
or that
color,
way, and it's
yeah.
always God blesses him. It's miraculous.
Yeah,
Don't,
sure.
Don't overlook that. So we're going to see how God provides, and all of that, by the way, I think one of the things to keep in mind is all of this is also building up. We talk about how in Egypt they've become a large enough group to be a nation.
Yes.
But all of this is actually the providence of God to make that happen, to get them to that point.
100%.
And all of this, then, we need to also consider is, and we say this a lot, all of this really is about the Messiah. It's about bringing about the birth of Jesus.
Sure.
And so that's important as well. So Sodom's described like Egypt, and that's where we're going to start this parallel. Sodom is Egypt, okay? Sodom is Egypt, and that becomes a thing. So why is God destroying Sodom? That becomes the question. Why is God going to destroy Sodom?
Verse 20 is where that's.
Evil.
Well, yeah. I said the outcry, right, against them is
Yeah.
what? Great. And the sin is grave.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a lot packed into a small amount of words right there.
Correct.
You know? And it's just, there's a lot going on here. There's a lot going on.
Yeah, and I thought what was interesting to me is the word outcry.
I agree.
We often think about, well, this is just God looks down at Sodom.
And it's just like sees all this
almost
sin.
like a Noah, a mini
Yeah,
Noah, days
yeah.
of Noah kind of thing.
But I agree. It's not
Yeah.
just God seeing that, I
Yeah.
don't think, right?
Yeah, the weak, and I think when we get to Ezekiel, we'll understand this. That the people who are being oppressed, disenfranchised in these two cities
Yeah.
are crying out for deliverance. That's the outcry. It's
Yeah.
from the people in these cities that are needing to be delivered.
Sure.
And God hears that. And I think that's important because God hears the cry of the suffering.
Yes, He does.
And so I think that's one of the things to keep in mind here. Any questions, thoughts about that before we move on? All right, so in Ezekiel 16, this is what's interesting. And even myself, I don't know that I had ever connected these passages in the study the way that we should have.
Because our mind goes directly to the
Because we
sin, to the
immediately
sin
think
of
of
homosexuality and
yeah.
just perversion in that direction, right?
Yeah. Somebody who's got a mic, read verses 48 through 50 of Ezekiel 16 for us. Use the mic when you do that, by the way.
I got it.
Jonathan?
As I live, declares the Lord God, your sister Sodom and her daughters have not done as you and your daughters have done. Behold, this was the guilt of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters had pride, excess of food, and prosperous ease, but did not aid the poor and the needy. They were haughty and did an abomination before me, so I removed them when I saw it.
Okay. So what do we have? How are they described?
What's that?
Right, but
Okay.
how's Sodom described?
They didn't
Yeah.
take care of the poor, right?
The two things here are pride,
Pride and excess.
and they've been blessed with
They didn't-
excess,
they
and they
didn't-
refuse to take care of the poor and the needy.
Yep.
What's missing from this description?
The sin that we would normally connect, right?
The sin that we normally
It's not that it's
focus
not
on.
there, but the big part of this outcry from the
Yeah.
people is about these things, right?
Correct.
You know, they're putting. I mean, we've seen this as we get further previous and further. God really looks at this when you're oppressing those who have less. Okay, it's a big outcry to Him.
Yeah, absolutely. And Israel doesn't really learn from it. Let's just be clear. I mean, you could almost take the words of Amos
Correct.
and plug them right in here on a lot of things, which is what's really interesting. So again, this is how it's described. It's not just homosexuality, and when you think about the outcry of those, it's the outcry of the oppressed, and so it's the people they're taking advantage of that are calling out to God.
So one of the things that I kind of thought about when I was looking at this was this whole aspect of their pride, right? I mean, pride is what we all know. Okay, pride is something that it goes before the fall, right? And so you have that, and you have this excess that they're not helping, they're oppressing others, the needy, and it said they're haughty. Okay, so they were just this prideful, haughty people, and then it says, and they did abomination before me. Kind of the result, okay, this abomination becomes a result of you and your pride and your haughtiness towards others and God.
And that mirrors Romans 1.
Yeah.
When you think about Romans 1, where it says that they've denied the Creator.
That's right.
And they've
Perverse.
become fools because they're so wise.
That's right. That's right.
So you
Wise in
think
their
about
own
all of that. And then that leads to Romans 1 talking specifically about the sin of homosexuality.
Yeah.
And so one of the things to understand is that really the pride and the arrogance is what is really the root cause of these other two things that are mentioned here.
Sure.
The oppression of the poor and the sexual immorality. It's because they've become so proud and arrogant they don't need God.
Yep.
And that's what Romans 1 really, I think, lays out pretty
does.
clearly for us.
Very clearly.
In that section. Yeah, Brandon.
Well, I mean, it's really kind of a microcosm replay of Genesis 6.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, so, I mean, in Genesis 6, what you have
Sure.
is the whole world was
Yeah.
evil continually.
Yeah.
Yep.
And here in this city, it's evil continually. And, I mean, it's so bad that not even 10 people can be found that are righteous in God's eyes. So the whole city is going to have kind of a mini replay of what happened with
Yeah.
the flood.
Yeah. In a different way.
God,
Yeah.
God cannot tolerate this evil, and it's not just sex. It's everything. It's every one of these people is just they're ungodly,
byproduct.
and God's going to get rid of them.
Right. And what is one of the biggest warnings God gives this group of people as they're about ready to take the land? Not marrying the people. That's an off branch of this other warning. What's the warning? When you go in the land,
Just
what
take
else
it.
though? What's the warning? Don't.
Don't turn
No, I said don't. Not about marrying. Say how quickly. Don't forget.
me. Don't forget me. Yeah.
What does pride cause you to do?
Forget God.
Forget God. Forget God. And so the danger they're going to have when they come in is look what we did. And God keeps saying, and Joshua and Moses keep warning, in the days when you enter the land and conquer it, do not forget God. Do not forget God. Do not forget. Over and over again, this generation is going to hear that. What really happens here is here's a group of people that are so proud they don't need God. And that will lead you to forgetting God. That's what Romans 1 really lays out, I think, a lot of ways there. So let's
Jonathan had
Oh,
something.
Jonathan, go ahead. While Jonathan's talking, we can do this Slido. You can scan in here what we can learn from Abraham and God, this bartering that takes place.
Just real quick, one thing we've seen is God has not changed.
No.
Yeah.
Before the law, through the law, and we see the teachings of Jesus through the New Testament. How did Jesus sum up the law? Love the Lord your God, love your neighbor as yourself. And as we see through the flood, we see through Sodom and all these stories,
Yeah.
what's their downfall? They forgot those two key points.
Absolutely.
Nothing's changed.
Bam.
Yeah,
Great
absolutely.
comment. Great comment.
Great comment. So this Slido, I got somebody typing. Join in here. There's probably a couple of things. So God basically says, I'm going to destroy Sodom. In fact, there's this conversation, the transition piece between the angels visiting and the story is God kind of having this conversation about whether or not to let Abraham in on what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And he
Yeah.
does, right? He lets Abraham in because Abraham's a friend of God. And so I think that's an interesting part we kind of skipped over is Abraham is counted as a friend of God. What does God do for Abraham in this story? He looks out for him like a friend.
Yeah.
He says, hey, I'm going to go destroy your nephew's place. Right? So
Right.
you might want to let him know.
Yep.
So then Abraham and God get into this exchange, negotiations. The book uses the word barter, where Abraham's like, what if I can find 50? God says, I'll spare him. What if I can find 40? And he works us all the way down to 10. And in these two cities, there's not 10 righteous people. Okay? And by the end of this, we may get to the point where there's really only one by the end of this story in some ways.
Abraham was hoping, Lot and his family and his friends may have made up 10,
Yeah. Apparently not. So one of the things, this reminds me a little bit of when Moses intercedes for
the people.
Israel
Yeah.
and says, God, you can't do this.
Yeah.
And these kind of stories give us a little bit of pause. Why do they do that?
Because we don't think of it in that terms so much of the time where we can go to God like that and
Yeah.
and kind of implore Him to try to change His mind.
Right.
It's usually about God changing us, right?
Right.
And it's not that we're changing God, but it's not that Moses or Abraham here are changing God, but they certainly have no problem going before God on behalf of others.
We see it as a challenge to God a little bit.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah. Like I'm
you-
challenging His deity or
Yeah,
something, you know?
And so we just think our job is to ask for things. I've used the term before, two terms. We treat God either like a vending machine or a spiritual Santa Claus, right? Like our job is to go ask for things
Yeah.
and He gives to us, but we're only asking and receiving. But here you have a couple of relationships of these people who have close, intimate relationships with God, who have no problem in prayer going and saying, hey, God, you made this promise. I'm going to hold you this promise in Moses' case. And here's saying, hey, you don't need to destroy these people. If we can find this many people, will you save them?
Yes, I will.
And so at the end of the day, Abraham loses the negotiations,
Yeah.
right? And what's really interesting is God already knows, by the way, when He agrees to the 50, that this ain't going to work out.
Yeah.
Right? But Abraham tries at the end of all of this. So there's some great answers here. God listens to us, considers what we say or ask.
Yep.
God listens to the righteous. That's a great point. God listens to Abraham's reasons, and the prayer of the righteous avail much. Really good. How wicked the entire city was. Yes, absolutely. The fact that there's not 10 righteous people in this city is a problem. Abraham loves his neighbors. I think that's true as well. And also this one here, they have a personal relationship. And I want to really focus on that for a moment. When it says that Abraham's counted as a friend of God, I don't think that's just happy talk or pablum. Like there's a relationship here
Sure.
that Abraham feels like he can go to God and talk about anything.
Yeah.
Now, part of that also is, by the way, that the ancients, and I would put Abraham in this category, they see God as the ultimate cause and root of everything, good or bad. And so when you see that motivates you to have these conversations with God more. Whereas we see that we normally attribute bad to only who?
Satan.
Satan, right? We don't pray to Satan. So
Right.
there's, at best we can go in and say God to protect us, but we don't think about, hey God, don't let this happen.
Yeah.
Don't let this happen. And that's the idea there. Brandon, you had your hand up.
I was going to say, I think we don't pray or we don't negotiate like this a lot of times because we don't have faith. We feel like we're not as righteous as Moses or Abraham, but I think we miss out on the point that we'll never be good enough, and we ought to approach God like He is our Father and He is righteous and He loves us, and the things that Moses and Abraham do, they remind God of who God is. And because of God's righteousness and God's justice and God's holiness, He's going to, and if we would be dependent and faithful enough to say, Lord, you are the one that can do this. Please do this. You're holy. And I think that's different. And we ought to think about that and probably try to do this more.
Yeah.
Where does that start? That was a question real quick. Where does that start, what you're talking about? Practicing what you're talking about. Where does that start?
It has to start with talking to God continually, I think, prayer.
I agree 100%. In relation to that, we have to, how does it start in our children? By them seeing the example, hearing the example, understanding that. Because if it's not, it's very difficult to get that concept the way you need to.
Yeah, I agree. I also think there's a lesson here that we tend to pray in generalities, and people like Moses and Abraham pray with specific things in mind.
Sure.
They pray very specific prayers, and we struggle with that.
Yeah.
And I think it's because of also what Brandon said. a lot of times the issue here is we don't have the faith to pray like this. We just
We
don't
do need-
believe
that's right.
God will answer our prayers the same way he answered Abraham. And it is true. I mean, James 1 makes it clear you can't ask without doubting, right? You've got to have faith to make a prayer.
True.
But that's a us problem, not a God problem. That's the challenge there to see.
That we are that we can't do things, and so we interpolate that onto God. Well, it doesn't have anything to do with God. God can do anything he wants to do. We just have to have the belief and the faith that he can.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, and heck with what Satan puts in our mind that we're incapable. Well, absolutely, we're incapable. That doesn't have anything to do with God's capabilities.
That's right.
We just have to see it correctly.
Amen.
Yep. Chris.
I mean, God could have told Abraham the result right at the beginning.
Yeah.
It shows his graciousness and his patience. And
Yep.
Really an encouragement for him to keep coming back to reveal what the
Yeah.
truth of the matter is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does show his patience, and absolutely.
And his desire for dialogue between him and his child, right?
Because he could have said, hey, Abraham, just give up. This ain't going to work. There's not enough there. I'm going to kill him. I mean, he could have been that up front.
Or who are you to talk to me like
Yeah.
this? Just
Yeah.
do what I tell you. I'm
You wonder if Abraham would have kept going, if he could have talked God out of it altogether. Just
I
let
don't
him
know.
know.
It
That didn't happen,
didn't
obviously.
happen, so, it's. How's the sin of Sodom almost immediately demonstrated? This is in the first part of Genesis 19. What's that? Okay. What's the story, though, at the beginning of Genesis 19? You have some
do they
angels
do?
that are
Yeah.
going to Lot's house for what purpose? Why are they going to Lot's house?
warning.
To deliver them. To
Get 'em
tell
out of there.
them, here's what's coming. I'm going to deliver you.
Yeah.
And here's the requirements I have of you to be delivered.
Yeah.
Right? And so you've got these two men. Again, we have, like at the beginning of chapter 18, two men who are angels come in, right? And they're taken into Lot's house. And then what we see is the scene unfold that is the illustration of the depravity of Sodom.
And Lot had to persuade them into his house, right?
Yeah, because
Right.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
They were
yeah.
just going to sleep out.
They were just going to say, he's like, no, you come
What
in
does that? What does that mean that Lot knows?
He knows how bad it is.
Lot knows that they're in danger, right? And what do the people of Sodom do?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they come
Surround
just
the tent, but
banging on the door and
just
and
bring
this
them
is
out.
The most disturbing part. There's some disturbing stories in the Bible. This is
Send
one
you
of
my
those.
daughters.
Judges 19 is a very disturbing story where you have a very similar circumstance that happens there. You might remember that's where the I think it's Levite hacks up his concubine into 12 pieces and sends her about. In both of those stories, I want you to notice that what's happening here is there's this sexual assault of a homosexual nature. And in both of those stories, these ancient people offer up women
Sure.
instead of the men in order to protect the men. Lot offers his two daughters to the men of Sodom to be used to protect these two strangers.
Why do you think Lot did that? Do we have any idea why Lot would have done that? Do you think Lot knew who these men were?
The value of women in that culture was not nearly what we value women.
No, that's true. Yeah, go ahead.
To kind of along those lines, we have a contrast between how chapter 18 opens and chapter 19 opens.
Okay.
Abraham shows hospitality to the strangers, and that was a big deal in that culture,
Big
and
deal.
should be a bigger deal in ours.
Yeah.
As opposed to
Don't let 'em sleep
we
straight.
open chapter 19. Yeah, don't sleep with them. But
No, don't sleep in the street. I said, yeah, he's not
don't
going to
sleep in the
let
street,
people, he's going to bring them in their homes. Yeah.
And chapter 19 opens with the exact opposite. You have strangers coming in, and they are assaulted or attempted to be assaulted. Abraham, or Lot in this case, is protecting the strangers and the sojourners who have come under his roof,
Which is
which was a big deal.
Requirement.
Now, how he went about it, certainly questionable, but he was trying to show that hospitality as Abraham did.
And he even goes to the extent of saying, these are virgin daughters.
Right.
And he's, and one of the things that would be different, just because we're all adults here, is in this culture, he's offering these daughters up. It would not be considered rape the same way it would be for these men. So in his mind, as twisted as it is, this is a win versus the other alternative. Now that baffles us, but one of the things that you have to understand is this is a good illustration of how differently we think culturally. Okay? And that's one of the reasons we sometimes need to go back and we need to think about things the way they culturally do. This is not a good thing, by the way. I'm not defending Lot, because one of the things this reveals is his time in Sodom has really had a decline on his own morality. This is a sign that his moral compass is also in huge decline of what it should be. That he is willing to make this offering is an awful, terrible thing. Okay? And we should not defend it. Yeah. Trying to explain it does not defend it. Please understand the difference between those two things. And by the way, what we'll learn, hopefully if we have time by the end of the lesson, is his daughter's moral compass. They're in decline as well.
Sure.
So we see that Sodom has had an effect on them, which is important. So what are the instructions given to Lot?
Leave
Leave.
now.
Go to the hill.
Now, don't pack up.
Don't look
get
back.
out.
Get out, go to the hills, and don't
And don't what?
look back.
Don't look back. Okay? Yeah.
2 Peter gives us some information that's helpful. It'll sum up some of the points you've already made. That if he rescued righteous Lot, greatly distressed by the sensual conduct of the wicked, for as that righteous man lived among them day after day, he was tormenting his righteous soul, and that's the appeal to God. It's coming from Lot for sure, over their lawless deeds when he saw and heard. And the Lord knows how to rescue the godly from trials and to keep the unrighteous under punishment until the day of judgment, and especially those who indulge in the lust of defiling passion and despise authority. So that ties not only do they put God out of their mind, they've made him an enemy. They despise him, and that shows up in their hospitality. It shows up in every aspect of their life, and that's the reason Ezekiel 16 is not really a surprising text at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yep. Okay, so we've only got about 12 minutes, so we're going to skip a little bit. Why was Lot's wife punished and Abraham isn't punished for looking at Sodom? Okay, Abraham wasn't commanded. This is a Slido, so if you want to do that, that's fine.
It was kind of the next day, too, wasn't it, that Abraham looked at it? I don't know that not looking back was more of something that was also a practical thing. In other words, you need to leave, get out of Sodom and Gomorrah, get out of there, and you don't even have time to look back. And Sarah, his wife, does. And she's turned into she's basically turned into what they think the area is today, a bunch of a pillar of salt and minerals.
Use your mind.
Don't look back at Egypt.
Yeah. Yeah, that part of this is here's the difference. Lot's wife is looking back with a longing.
I think that's the case, yeah.
She's
been affected.
She's been affected.
However that may be, yeah.
And that has become her cultural heritage at this point. In a relatively short amount of time, by the way.
So faith plays a great deal into this. Right?
Absolutely.
The heart, that's the key.
And so one way to look at this is Abraham is looking on God's judgment.
Yeah.
While she is looking back with a desire to go back. And that's where the important there is the desire to go back, and Joe mentions that. That's really what's important here is this becomes Sodom is Egypt, and Israel is Lot's wife.
Exactly. Yeah.
And what has happened repeatedly in the wandering of the wilderness? What was a repeated problem for these people in the wilderness as they're wandering?
Just go back to
Yeah, they
Yeah.
want to go back.
Were there not enough graves in Egypt? Can we, and in Numbers 14, after Numbers 13 ends with we're but grasshoppers in their eyes, the immediate thing is, you should take us back to Egypt.
Yeah.
It's better in Egypt. Everything's better back in Egypt.
Yep.
That's the idea. And so here is Lot's wife who's holding on to what is better to her. Now for us, we don't understand that because we've learned this story all our life. We think how stupid this is.
Right.
Right? But if it's you, and I liken this to even something as simple as if your house is burning down and you get out, there is a sadness of the things you lose in that process.
Sure.
If you've ever been through that. My grandmother's house burnt. There's a sadness in that process
Sure.
of the things that are destroyed. That is a very trivial in comparison to what is going on here. It's not just their house burning, it's all their friends.
Yep.
It's their
everything.
son-in-law's families. It's everything to do with their
Structure.
life in every way. And so it's a pretty massive thing here that's important. So why, we've already touched this a little bit, but why does Moses' audience need to hear this story?
What are they doing? Yeah.
Yeah.
Need to quit looking back to Egypt. Right.
And so there's no doubt
Look ahead.
that, and I don't know that we can limit it to Lot, but we know for sure Lot must be one of the ones outcrying, for sure. And that would include, you would think, his family, and yet here his wife is, what does she do immediately? She's probably cried out to be delivered from Sodom, but now that she's losing Sodom, she's just like Israel. Oh, it's better in Egypt.
I do have a question. Do you think, I never really thought about this before, but all their possessions probably got destroyed, including all their herds and their livestock and their herdsmen and all that other stuff is
The
destroyed
chances of the
too.
herdsmen being destroyed aren't as great. We don't know because
But
outside
doesn't
the
the brimstone destroy the whole plain?
it does, but we don't know where the herds are at. I mean, that's
We just
the
don't
thing.
know.
We don't know. Could be.
Yeah.
Don't know. Don't know. I wouldn't say one way or another is all I'm saying about that. Not disagreeing, just saying sometimes we just got to admit we're ignorant of all those facts. And I don't think it matters to the story because what matters is God delivers it, period.
Yep.
So they need to hear this because God's delivered them from Egypt and they're being just like Lot's wife.
Yeah.
Stop looking back. Now, this comes to us. What should we learn about the story of Sodom and Gomorrah and Lot's wife? And you know, there's Joe's reference 2 Peter 2. There's other passages. What are some things, and this was part of your lesson, and just we're out of time to go read all those passages, but what are some things that we have to learn from this story that we should apply to us? That's a Slido, so if you don't want to speak out, you can type in. If you want to speak out, go ahead. Okay. Beware of looking back. Okay.
A longing of missing your past life and sin.
Yeah.
Right.
Which,
That's
I
why
mean,
you don't
we're
wanna be
just so
doing it.
part of this world. It's kind of like the
We got to look ahead.
the Galatians thing with Ishmael.
Right.
I mean, it's hard to separate yourself from this world.
Disconnect. Yep.
Yep.
But it's something we got to do.
Anybody else? Nobody? A couple of answers up here on the screen. Let me get to those real quick. Avoid ungodliness, cling to God, keep our focus on the eternal, not look back or love this world. And that's true, but how hard is it to not love the world you live in?
It's hard.
I mean,
It's easier if you associate and basically, I mean, God's given us our church family for a reason,
yeah.
and if your friends are righteous friends, I mean, Lot has no righteous people around him,
Correct.
and we have to be intentional with what we do with our lives. It's not that we, bury our head in the sand and
That's right.
go off into a compound. But I mean, who we associate with really does make a difference. And for Lot, it was a bad deal for
Huge.
him to live in this place.
Yep.
And we should just be cognizant of that.
Another answer here is reverence, thankfulness, trusting is what God wants, looking back to our past life with longing is disgusting to God. I think those all deal with that great. We've got to move on just real quickly. Why was Lot delivered? Okay. I think this is the thing that's really interesting. Was Lot's personal righteousness the reason he's delivered?
God remembered Abraham.
Yeah. No, I get it. I get the righteous, but it also says that
God remembered
remembered
Abraham. That's what it says.
remembered Abraham and
And
Lot.
Lot. Yeah. But it says
And I
Abraham.
think what we need to understand is Lot's delivered because God made a covenant with Abraham.
That's right.
And Lot's part of
Sure.
that covenant.
It's part of it.
This is God honoring his covenant. And that's a powerful lesson to think about.
Sure.
Because one of the things we notice is while Lot is considered righteous, let's be for real, he's not righteous enough. He offers up his daughters to be
Nobody is. Yeah.
abused, ultimately. And that's a moral problem. None of us are righteous enough to be delivered.
No.
I think that's the thing to understand.
Sure.
But God remembers his covenant,
Yep.
and he delivers based on that by grace. This is a story, by the way, of grace. Maybe we don't talk about that enough. But God shows grace to Lot,
A lot in this thing.
truthfully, and his family by rescuing him,
Sure.
because there's some sinful practices that we've read about in the story.
Yeah.
Okay? And that's the hard part. And you'll see this covenant is going to have an impact, I think, in even a moment. How do we parallel Abraham and Lot in our covenant with Christ? Now, we don't have a huge amount of time, unfortunately, to get into all this, but Philippians 3 is the passage that was referenced with this question, and it talks about circumcision, and it talks about our circumcision. But the ultimate thing here is that God delivers Abraham and Lot because he has a covenant with them.
Yep.
God has a covenant with us.
That's right.
You know, and it's interesting because
Christ.
Brandon said something earlier that kind of struck me as safe for this moment, where he said, we don't think we're righteous enough to talk to God the way they do. Through Christ we are.
That's right.
And that's something we've got to remember.
It
Through
all
Christ
surrounds
we are.
that covenant.
Yeah.
And if God makes a covenant, he makes a covenant. We're the ones going to break it, not God. So you can rely on God.
I knew this would pull Joe out.
No, I don't need to be an apologist for Lot because the Bible does that for him.
Sure.
But Lot does leave the Ur of the Chaldees, and he shows faith.
Yeah.
He doesn't reach the level of Abraham's faith, but God doesn't
Sure.
award eternal life with him based on being Abraham.
No.
Good point.
Yeah.
Here's the thing to keep in mind when I bring up the flaws of the Old Testament heroes. They're all presented as deeply flawed.
Sure.
And even Abraham at times.
Even Abraham. Now, when we teach the VBS stories, we ignore those flaws with the kids. We just paint these guys to be these heroes that are fantastic and never, like Samson's the ultimate. I'm just gonna pull that out because me and Joe always laugh
He's
about
mean
that.
about it.
I mean, there's nothing good about Samson you could even construe till perhaps his last moment. And we paint this picture of this amazing, strong hero who, by the way, if your daughter brought home Samson, you would be livid. Right? But in VBS, that's what we do. And then we get really uncomfortable. We point out, like, David is a rapist and a murderer. Wait a minute, he's a man after God's own heart. Yeah. And he's still deeply flawed. The Old Testament does that intentionally. And part of that is to realize that that's why we need grace. It's only by God's grace in the end that even what we consider the righteous are delivered.
That's right.
That's the message there. Not that he's so flawed he shouldn't be delivered. Right?
Yep.
Yeah, and it's his righteousness.
It's his
right.
righteousness,
It's his,
not ours.
not ours.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Real quick, because we've got no time. Moab and Ammon are the result of, for I mean, let's just call it what it is.
Incest.
Incestuous relationships between Lot's daughters and their father. And why is this important? If you read the text that deals with that, they are told, you can't touch Moab and Ammon.
Can't touch them. That's right.
Why is that, do you think? Why can't they touch Moab and Ammon?
That's right.
It's just, again, God remembering the covenant.
That's right.
That's all this is. He's made a covenant. It's the same reason Ishmael is protected in the end.
Sure.
That even though he's not the child of promise, he is a child of Abraham.
Abraham.
That's really hard for us as well. Okay, we're out of time. Thank you. Thanks, Scott, for sitting in.